The moment she turned her face toward the light, Richard Sterling felt the air leave his body. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was the slow, crushing realization that begins in the chest and spreads outward, stealing oxygen from the lungs and strength from the knees. The dirt masked her features. The tangled gray hair hid her once perfect curls. The oversized coats swallowed the posture of a woman who once carried herself like royalty. But a son knows his mother, not by her clothes, not by her wealth, not even by her face. He knew the way she held her hands when she was confused. He knew the slight tilt of her head when she was trying to remember something just out of reach. He knew the tremble in her fingers, and he knew that no amount of dirt could disguise that. 50 yards away, inside a sleek black SUV, the most powerful man in the city began to tremble. They say you can measure a man not by how he treats his equals, but by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. In the hierarchy of the city, there are kings in glass towers. And then there are the ghosts, the sanitation workers who move before sunrise, the janitors who wipe down boardrooms after executives leave, the men and women who keep society running without ever being invited to stand in its spotlight. Elias was one of those ghosts. For 6 years he had worked Sector 4 sanitation. Sector 4 was the shift nobody wanted. It started at 3 a.m., when the sky was still black and the cold felt personal. The neighborhoods were rougher. The streetlights flickered or didn't work at all. Some blocks felt abandoned even though people lived there. Elias didn't complain. He never had. He was a broad-shouldered man with hands thick from years of lifting trash bags heavy with everything the city didn't want to see. His boots were scuffed, his uniform faded, his paycheck modest, but his eyes were soft and tired. By noon each day, his back burned, his knees felt twice his age, his gloves smelled like 1,000 strangers' lives. At home, his wife Sarah stretched every dollar carefully. Their daughter Lily needed braces. The dentist's estimate sat on the kitchen counter like a silent accusation. Still, Elias showed up every morning, because his father had taught him something simple. Dignity isn't in the job title, son. It's in the man. So Elias didn't just empty bins. He stood them upright if they fell. He picked up trash that had blown across sidewalks. He moved children's bicycles from behind cars so parents wouldn't accidentally crush them on the way to work. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things that never make headlines. Every route has a landmark. For Elias, it was 5th and Main. That corner belonged to a woman the neighborhood called Old Mary. No one knew her real name. She was always wrapped in layers, coats too big, scarves too thin, boots that had seen better decades. She pushed a rusted shopping cart filled with plastic bottles, newspapers, broken trinkets, blankets stiff with dried rain. To the world it was garbage. To her, it was everything. People crossed the street when they saw her. She muttered to herself, sometimes shouted at cars that passed too close, sometimes laughed at things no one else could see. Most drivers honked if she lingered too long near the road, but Elias always slowed down. Morning, Mama, he would call out. Sometimes she stared through him, sometimes she ignored him, and sometimes, on rare mornings when the fog in her mind lifted, she would smile. A small, toothless smile. That was enough for him. The Tuesday that changed everything arrived gray and bitter. The kind of cold that creeps under your clothes and stays there. When the garbage truck rolled up to 5th and Main, Elias felt something wrong before he saw it. Traffic was backed up. Drivers were leaning on their horns. And there she was, standing in the service lane, frozen. Her shopping cart lay tipped sideways. One wheel had snapped off completely. Blankets and papers were scattered into oily slush. A plastic bottle rolled slowly toward a storm drain. She was shaking violently. Not the dramatic kind of shaking, the dangerous kind. A taxi swerved around her. A driver shouted something cruel out the window. She looked down at the mess of her life spilled onto asphalt, and tears cut clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. Elias's partner Darnell tapped the dashboard. "Leave it, E. We're already behind." Elias looked at the schedule sheet clipped to the visor. Then he looked at her again. He didn't see a homeless woman. He saw someone's grandmother. He saw fear. "Not today," he muttered. And before Darnell could protest, Elias jumped down from the truck. He stepped directly into traffic, raising one gloved hand. A delivery van screeched to a stop inches from his hip. Drivers cursed. He didn't care. He walked straight toward her. "I got you, Mama," he said, voice low and steady. "I got you." He knelt in the freezing slush without hesitation. Dirty water soaked through his work pants instantly. His knees stung from the cold. One by one, he began gathering her belongings. Wet newspapers, crushed cans, a cracked photo frame with no picture inside. He handled each item gently, because he knew something most people forgot. To her, this wasn't trash. It was memory. Her hands were trembling too hard to help. Without thinking, Elias removed his thermal gloves. "Here," he said softly, sliding them over her icy fingers. "You're freezing." Her skin was paper-thin, fragile. She looked at him with wide, confused eyes. Eyes that had once read bedtime stories and signed business contracts and held babies. Then Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. He gently wiped oil from her cheek. The gesture was simple, but intimate, tender. The world seemed to pause around them, and 50 yards away, a man inside a black SUV felt his heart split in two. Inside the black Lincoln Navigator, Richard Sterling could not breathe. For 6 months, he had lived inside a private hell. 6 months earlier, his mother, Elelanina Sterling, had walked out of a gated estate worth more than most neighborhoods. Early onset dementia. That was the diagnosis. It had started small. Forgotten appointments, repeated stories, misplaced keys. Then, one evening, she had asked Richard where her childhood home was. The house she grew up in had been demolished 40 years ago. That same night, while the household staff prepared dinner, a gate had been left unlatched. Security cameras caught her walking down the driveway at dusk. No shoes, no purse, just confusion. By the time anyone noticed, she was gone. Private investigators were hired immediately. Search parties formed, posters printed, billboards rented. Richard personally offered a reward that could change someone's life. Nothing. The city swallowed her whole. And now, 6 months later, Richard had begun preparing himself for the worst. He drove through the city almost every morning before work. He had memorized the faces under bridges, the shelters, the alleyways. He told no one how often he did this. It wasn't a CEO's job to wander the streets looking for ghosts. But he wasn't a CEO when he was searching. He was just Richie, a son. And that morning, stuck in traffic, irritated and distracted, he saw the sanitation truck stop abruptly. He watched the big worker jump down. He watched him step into traffic. He watched him kneel. And something in his chest tightened, because that tilt of the woman's head, that small tremor in her hands, it couldn't be. It couldn't. But it was. Richard didn't remember opening the car door. He didn't remember stepping into the cold. He only remembered walking toward them, feeling as if gravity had doubled. The sanitation worker had just finished fastening the broken wheel back onto the cart with a thick zip tie. "There you go," he said gently. "Good as new." Richard heard his own voice before he felt it. "Excuse me." The worker turned, protective instantly. "Sir, you need to step back. It's dangerous." Richard ignored him. He moved around him slowly, and then he saw her face fully. Older, thinner, weathered by months of survival, but unmistakable. His knees hit the asphalt hard. "Mama," he whispered. The word broke. "It's me. It's Richie." The woman blinked. Her eyes, fogged and distant, searched his face. For a long moment, nothing happened. Traffic hummed quietly around them. The sanitation worker stood frozen, unsure. Then her hand, covered in oversized work gloves, lifted slowly. She touched Richard's cheek. Her fingers trembled against his skin. "Richie," she said, voice hoarse and fragile. "You're late for dinner." And just like that, 6 months of controlled composure shattered. Richard collapsed forward, resting his forehead in her lap, sobbing like a child. The billionaire, the executive, the man who commanded thousands, reduced to a son who had found his mother. People in nearby cars lowered their windows. No one honked anymore. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias stepped back quietly. He understood now. This wasn't just old Mary. This was someone's whole world. It took nearly an hour to untangle everything. An ambulance arrived. No sirens, no urgency in the lights, just quiet professionalism. The paramedics moved gently. Richard refused to let go of her hand. Before getting into the ambulance, he turned toward Elias. For the first time, their eyes met properly. Richard saw the soaked uniform, the stained knees, the bare hands red from cold. He walked up to him and grabbed his hands in both of his. He didn't care about dirt. "You saved her," Richard said. Elias shook his head slightly. "I just helped her up. You saw her," Richard corrected. When everyone else looked away, Elias shrugged, almost uncomfortable. "She's someone's mother." Richard swallowed. "She's my mother. Elelanina Sterling." The name hung in the air. Even Darnell, still leaning out of the truck, straightened. Richard continued, voice steady but emotional. "She built Sterling Industries from nothing. This entire company exists because of her." Elias blinked once, then nodded. "Didn't know that," he said quietly. "Wouldn't have changed anything." And in that moment, Richard felt something shift inside him. All his life, he had believed power was measured in acquisitions, in stock prices, in expansion. But the greatest strength he had seen that day was kneeling in slush. At the hospital, doctors confirmed severe dehydration, malnutrition, and exposure. But miraculously, no permanent damage. "She's strong," one nurse said. Richard almost laughed. Strong didn't begin to describe her. When she finally slept peacefully, Richard stepped out into the hallway. He found Elias sitting alone on a bench, still in his uniform, holding a paper cup of coffee someone had given him. "You didn't have to stay," Richard said. Elias shrugged. "Just wanted to make sure she was okay." Richard sat beside him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Richard said quietly, "For 6 months, I've blamed myself." Elias listened. "I thought if I had been home earlier, if security had been tighter, if I hadn't been so busy." He trailed off. Elias looked at him carefully. "She remembered you," he said. "That's what matters." Richard nodded slowly. Then he made a decision. 3 weeks later, a press conference was held. But it wasn't about a merger or a new expansion. It was about dignity. Richard announced the creation of the Elelanina Foundation, dedicated to identifying and reuniting displaced elderly individuals suffering from cognitive decline. Mobile medical teams, citywide identification systems, outreach programs. But there was one more announcement. Richard stepped aside and called a man to the podium. Elias walked up, visibly uncomfortable in a borrowed suit. "This man," Richard said, "reminded me what leadership actually looks like." Elias tried to protest quietly. Richard continued, "He will serve as Director of Field Operations for this foundation." The crowd applauded. Elias leaned toward the microphone. "I'm not a businessman," he said honestly. "I'm just someone who didn't want to leave a person in the road." The applause grew louder. Months passed. Elias eventually hung up his sanitation gloves. But he didn't throw them away. He placed them in a glass case in his office. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Every time he walked past them, he remembered that freezing Tuesday. The slush, the trembling hands, the simple decision to step forward instead of driving past. His daughter got her braces. His mortgage was paid off. But the real reward wasn't financial. It was knowing that dignity had rippled outward. Elena Sterling recovered slowly at home, surrounded by care and family. Sometimes she still forgot things, but she never forgot Richie. And sometimes when she saw Elias visit, she would smile and say, "The nice man with the warm gloves." Moral of the story: every person you pass is carrying a story you cannot see. The woman pushing a cart may once have built empires. The man collecting your trash may possess more integrity than a boardroom full of executives. Kindness is not weakness. It is recognition. Recognition that beneath dirt, illness, addiction, or poverty, there is history. There is love. There is someone who once held a child's hand. We walk past ghosts every day, but they are only ghosts because we choose not to see them. And sometimes, the greatest act of leadership is simply kneeling down in the street and saying, "I got you. If this story moved you, let it change the way you see the world." The next time you pass someone invisible, pause, look twice, offer dignity, offer humanity, because you never know whose world you might be holding together in a single moment. And if you believe compassion still matters in a world obsessed with status, share this story. Subscribe to Momentum Stories for more reminders that true wealth isn't measured in billions. It's measured in how you treat the person who can give you nothing in return. Be kind. Always be kind, because you never know who you are approaching.